So far, the first session was about Redux data flow, which is kind of an advanced topic and compare with the second session. In the second, if I could, if I would have the chance again, I would have changed the order, because the second session was about React component state and the life cycle of React components, which is sort of parts of the React basics. And the other thing was the third session was about middlewares and React Redux life cycle. So actually, the best order to watch the episodes that I have shared in my YouTube channel would be something like this: to watch the second episode first, the third episode as the second one, and then you could watch the first. After the third session, you would have a better understanding of different types of middlewares that you could, use in a Redux setup. And in the first episode, what I, explained is how the whole Redux data flow works using a middleware called redux-thunk. So, but I have explained it with more details, and I have, a lot of notes and links that I thought it might be helpful. In the fourth session, there is this topic, there's this term that we hear a lot in React community, universal JavaScript using React. And what I tried to do in the fourth session was to walk you through all the different topics that you need to know in order to understand what it means to create universal applications, or how to write a universal JavaScript code. And you could just say the whole, universal JavaScript in a nutshell is something like to write JavaScript code which is environment agnostic, not device agnostic. It doesn't have anything to do with creating cross-platform applications using PhoneGap or Ionic and stuff like that. It's just all about environment. So we have two specific type of environments usually. One is the environment that we have in browser, and the other one is the Node.js environment. If you have created your application using Node.js on the back end and JavaScript on the front end, you could write some, parts of your application could be universal, which means that that code is environment agnostic. That code is going to work on both sides, in client and also in backend. That's exactly what you could say is the meaning of universal JavaScript with React. So React allows us to create universal applications much easier. In the fifth session, we went through ES6 function generators and another Redux middleware called Redux Saga. And the other Redux middleware that we had covered before was called redux-thunk. Redux Saga offers, allows us to use function generators, which is a new feature of JavaScript. And you could find almost all of these topics in one single application inside this apps folder. But for universal JavaScript, I have created this Next.js application that you could find here. And so, for instance, this code that you see here works the same in browser and Node.js. Node.js here renders the same thing and allows us to have server-side rendering, and it works the same in browser with React. So this is something that we could implement using Next.js. And in the fifth session, I created this application, function generators. So you could, watch the episodes and go through these files. And this user management app is the main application that I have created specifically for this workshop, and it's more similar to a real world application. And I have used Reactor Starter Kit. So whenever I want to create a new JavaScript application, I usually use a Reactor Starter Kit. So to get it started, it is sort of, it's a boilerplate. So this is Reactor Starter Kit that you could use whenever you want to set up a new application. But it has a ton of different types of technologies implemented in it. So but what it does, it allows you to have everything out of the box, everything that you need: server-side rendering, universal routing, and stuff like that. So it has different branches. For instance, if you want to use Redux, which is usually what I want to do, you could change your branch to this branch and start from here. This is exactly what I have done for this application, user management application. Before I start the topic of the session, what I'm going to do, I'm going to just launch this application to show you what it has. So, user management app, and npm start does everything. It has live reloading and everything. Again, I haven't done anything to implement, to create all of these features to have live reloading and stuff like that. This is what Reactor Starter Kit already offers us. So this application is responsive. So I have tried to make it responsive. So, and its dashboard offers two different parts. You could see that we have a list of groups that you could create new groups like administrators. It's using my local MongoDB database. So here you could create more users, testers, for instance. So, and if you refresh the page, you could see that it has server-side rendering, and the grid that we see here has been already, the HTML of this page has been rendered using Node.js. So one of the reasons that we need this universal application is this, to be able to create to have server-side rendering in case. And the reason that we need this is that for search engines to be able to crawl our applications correctly. So if you create this using Angular 1, for instance, your original HTML file is just couple of HTML in index.html with couple of HTML, couple of lines of HTML code, which doesn't actually have anything. So then after loading the JavaScript, everything gets rendered. But using React and Redux and using this boilerplate, this application works this way. It has this grid out of the box. Even, for instance, if Google crawls this page is going to have all of these groups. So this is something that is good for search engine optimization and stuff like that. So, okay, great. So I guess now you have the big pictures. Let's go to the topic of this session. Topic of this session is about RxJS and redux-observable. After spending some time around this topic, what I decided to do was to make this session, do this, or cover this topic in two sessions, because it's a really RxJS and also redux-observable together make a really huge topic, and it's not that feasible to cover them both and cover everything that we need to cover in one session. So in this session, what we are going to do first is to cover the basics of RxJS. It's not for me to teach you actually everything about RxJS in this session. It's just here in, the purpose of this session is to let you know what it means when we say RxJS Observables. And after that, after learning some, basics of RxJS Observables, we are gonna set up a redux-observable, which is a Redux middleware. I have already created this two applications here that you could see. It's not an actual application, it's just a simple setup using Webpack, and I have just used RxJS to show you different examples. That let me just comment out all the examples and start from the beginning. But before I do this, let me show you how this works. So here I just have this index.html page, which has this script tag, and I have this webpack.config, and as you see, the configuration is not a big deal. It has some Babel configuration, and it excludes node modules, and it uses Babel loader to bundle our app.js JavaScript code that we have here. So, and this index.html, inside the HTML part, we don't have any, all we have is just a simple form with an input for, a text input and another input for, as the submit button, and two other divs that we are going to use during the session. So, first, what I need to, let you know here is that this part of the session doesn't have anything to do with React. So it doesn't have anything to do with React, which means it's just JavaScript, jQuery, and RxJS. This is what I'm going to cover in the first half of this session. Okay, let's start. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start. So I have already stopped user management app. So first I have to run this application. To run this application, I'm going to call, let's see, I have two different scripts that I have defined here. One of them is Webpack with this -w to watch the changes and build the bundle again, and the other one is just to run the server on this port. Let's do this. So npm run watch, okay, and also npm start. Great. As you see, the page doesn't have anything. So yeah, if everything here happens inside the console actually initially. So let's see what is the first example. Okay, I assume that you have already seen different types of patterns to handle asynchronous operations in JavaScript. The first ever, pattern that we used in JavaScript was callback functions. So the structure of a callback function worked like this. So you had, for instance, jQuery, which had $.get, for instance, which is an Ajax XHR request, which sends an XHR request. You give it your URL and you pass it your callback function. Then this callback function is going to be called when the response comes. So because there is some difference between the point that you send the request and the point that you receive that, this is something that you should implement if you are going to use the callback pattern. But after a couple of years, JavaScript developers dealt with callback functions, and it was really painful to deal with that because of the different reasons that you could find online if you look it up. For instance, we had to create this callback hell, pyramid of doom, something that if you needed data to load another data and something like that, you had to create this nested Ajax call, which is not a good thing and makes the whole process much more difficult to handle. For instance, it's much more difficult to handle the errors and stuff like that. After a couple of years, what happened was promises showed up. Promise is something that now these days we have out of the box inside the JavaScript engines. So promise allowed us to have a much better implementation of asynchronous operations. So the way that a promise worked was like, whenever we sent a request, like even the $get, you don't have to call, give it a callback. It gives you something, a container, an object. This object here that you have when you send a request, it's a promise, which means it's gonna have the value sometime in the future. So, but you could use that to wait for its value. Now, this object has a then function attached to that, and you could pass a function to get its value. So this function is going to be called once the value is present. So why it's better in compared with callback? You might say that in both cases we need to pass this callback function. The reason that promise is a better implementation is that it allows you to chain on the promise, and you don't need to create this pyramid. You don't have to, if you want to wait for another promise, you could just return that promise inside this function. So you don't have to create another nested promise call inside this function again. So it's going to give you it's going to allow you to have a flat chain like this, then, and you could catch all of the errors, and at some point at the end, like with this .catch. This makes the whole process of handling errors much easier. Now, the reason that we had to know, just maybe I had to explain this to you, was that RxJS Observable offers another way of looking at this problem that we have. Instead of callbacks and promises, now we have observables. Observables are something, or some kind of objects that allows us to observe a specific type of event. So everything in JavaScript, as you might know, revolves around events. So how about we start with observables for events? Let's do this. Let's create our first example for observables. So the first thing that we need to do to create an example is first to import the RxJS itself. So I have already created that here. So submit form example. Yeah, like this. We need to import the jQuery because we are going to use it. So let's see what we have inside this index.html. We have this form tag, and inside that we have two inputs. One is a button for submitting the form, the other is a text box. Now, one thing that we usually do whenever we have a form, we want to, for instance, to listen to the submit event of that form. So can we do that using RxJS? Definitely. How? It's really easy. So by the way, RxJS has a constructor called observable. So if you want to create an observable from scratch, you could do that. You could use RxObservable, but we are not going to use that for now. Let's just use from event, because it's going to give us some, an understanding of how it actually works. So the first thing that we need is the object that we are going to add that event for. So what is it, that object that we want here is the form input. Form element. So you could just say, I'm going to look for the form, any form tag inside, because I already know that we have one single form. So the first element that we should pass to the from events of observable is the element, the HTML element that you want to, watch for any events and that. And the second one is the name of the event. So when you use this function, it creates an observable object. So it creates, actually, we don't call it an observable. What it creates, it creates a stream of, it creates a stream of values that we could subscribe to. So, and the naming convention for RxJS is like this. So let's say this is called form stream, and it has this $sign at the end. This is, again, you don't have to use this naming convention, but if you do, it's going to be more it's going to have more compliance with the RxJS conventions. So the next thing that we should do here is this form stream dot subscribe. So whenever you want to subscribe, you should pass 3 functions to that stream. The first function is this, that whenever a value is emitted to this observable stream, we could observe that using the first function. So there is one quick point that I should bring up here. One difference that we could just detect right now between observables and promises is that promise could only be resolved once, which means every promise could only have one single value, but a stream of observable could you could emit different several values to that stream, and it's going to work. So this is something huge, that one of the weaknesses of promises was always that why we cannot send more than one value, why we cannot resolve a promise with more than one value. If you know anything about promises, that whenever this topic is brought up, in some with some mind, if you know everything about promises, you would say that it doesn't make sense. Actually, promises are just meant to be for one single value, but in real world applications we need to be able to subscribe to more than one value of one event. So okay, the next one here is the error callback. It's similar to the catch when you use promises. The next one here is the interesting part, is the completed part. So it's like this: whenever the the stream of data is finished and there is no more value to to emit, to be broadcasted, this function is going to be called. So in this case, that we want to submit something, and we want to listen to that submit event, what happens is that this console log completed is not going to be called anytime, because it's an endless stream of events. So submit could happen several times. So that's why when you use this observable from event, it creates a stream which is not going to be completed at all. So let's just do this. Let's console.log here, and okay, let's say we have received an event. So this is an event object that we have received. So if any error happens, this is the place that we log the error object. Okay, so that's it. We could now try this, and let's see now how it works. So since here, okay, let's do something. Let's add a debugger here, a breakpoint, to see if it's actually running. Here we go. Exactly what we needed. Here we subscribe to something, and when I click on submit, now this function that we have created is being called. If I just click on this, it's gonna just console log this string. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you what we have now inside this E variable, E argument. It is just a jQuery event which is being broadcasted here, because what we passed was a jQuery object. The form object is a jQuery object that we pass here, and that's because of that RxJS knows that should listen to jQuery events, and it returns the jQuery event. So here, so as we all know about jQuery events, it has this target, for instance. Yeah, the target is the form tag. So do we have prevent default? Yes, we do. So if we want to deal with any form in real-world applications these days, we have to prevent the default, because the default behavior of any form these days is like this. Do you see this URL? It reloads the page, and it posts the whole data using an old-fashioned way. That's why the default behavior should be disabled. E.prevent default. This is something that we need to do. So let's just say that I could now remove all this code and uncomment the first import that I have here. I have already written this code here, and as you see, it's just exactly the same, with one single difference, that here I have used this the form ID instead. So if I reload the page and I click on this, just my name, submit that, I'm gonna have this form submit over here without the page being up. I will have to remove this first. Now again, if I just submit my form, as you see, the URL didn't change, and I have the form submit in the console. So let's use let's implement this for this from event function with other events. So the next one is the input sample. We already have an input inside this page, and let's just move back my code. Instead of form, now I'm gonna just say, I know that I have an input tag inside my page, and its name is full name. Okay, now I'm gonna change the variable to input, And the event that I'm going to be listening to, because I need the value of that input, would be key up. So here I'm going to need to change the value, just the name of the stream, because it's now it should be called input stream. Input stream. The rest is exactly the same. We want to subscribe to an event that is happening whenever any key up happens inside the browser. So, do we need this? I don't think so. Key up doesn't have a specific default behavior, but if you want to, do any other, it has, for instance, stop propagation that in some cases you might want to call to prevent this from being bubbled to the next levels of the DOM. But you have access to all the, all the jQuery event functionality. So here in this case, we don't need that. So let's just do something. We know that this target, e.target, should be the input that we have inside the page. So, and since it is an input tag, it's going to have this value. So let's just console log this value. So we have received a value, for instance. Okay, error and completed. Again, since this key op is some kind of event that could happen again and again and again, and it's just nothing that could be finished and completed, this callback, this function that we have here for completed is not going to be called anytime. So let's just click this and write something down. I'm going to use my name. As you see, you can see that for every single key up, we have something in the console. So this is exactly how you could do that. So you could even create different things like, I already have an output div tag in my page. $, I assume it was the output. Just let me just cheat and copy my code from here. Here we go. So what I could do now, I could print the value, add that value somewhere in the page, do some kind of DOM manipulation. So what I could do, I could append or change the text of that div tag. So whatever, or even let's use HTML. Whatever I put inside that index, inside that input is going to be right here. So let's save this and try this code again. And as you can see, my name is over here. Which, since I have used HTML, if I do I assume H1, right, as you can see, now it has been added as an H1 tag to the page. So if I use text, it's going to be converted to a text, even if I use this tag structure H1 and hello. I needed to reload the page. So as you can see, the text is over here. Anyway, so this is exactly how you can subscribe to a stream of event using RxJS. Or you can remove all this code and again uncomment the first two imports that I have here. So what I have done in my example is this. I just used the same thing that we did here. I have used this output.text. So if I just do something like this and submit my form, both of those events are being called. The next example is move sample. Let's just read the code that I have written. So I have this output And inside that, whenever this mouse move happens over document, so as you can see here, from event happens on document instead of any jQuery object, which means you don't have to use jQuery if you don't want to. You could use any DOM library that you need, like jQuery, or without jQuery you could even pass the element itself and call from event mouse move. So now if any mouse move happens over the document, we could subscribe to that and we could receive the values. So this is happening continuously. That's why this event is not being completed at all, because this is a DOM event. So let's try this now. We have to go back to app.js and uncomment this one. So if I move this, as you can see, it shows the current position of my mouse here, X and Y. So this means that the data which is being passed to my subscribe function, it is a data of which is a continuously a stream of data which is not being finished at any point. So this is exactly what you could use an observable for. So that's one of the nice things about observables, that you could use that to subscribe to a stream of data, or to subscribe to an asynchronous operation like promises. You cannot use promises for this type of use cases because we have several values being resolved at every single point. So it doesn't make any sense to use promises in these cases. Okay, is it just this from event that we could do? We could have for to create observables from? No, we could create observables from arrays. For instance, instead of using for each, you could iterate over an array. You could use arrays like this. So let's see here what I have as my array. So as you can see, this is a mock data, a list of posts that I have 3 posts, for instance. So let's say it is an API response that we have received after calling an API. So and here we have 3 titles, 3 bodies, 3 different objects inside this array. What we could do now, we could, instead of from event, now here we should call RxObservable.from. What we could pass to this from is either an array or a set or a map. I have prepared examples from every of these 3 types. So let's just use a simple array. So instead of these, what we could do, we could simply go, just say post.forEach and call a function to that. But instead of that, you could do this. So it's not the only thing that you could do. You could do a lot of, once the post that you have is converted to a stream, an array that we have is converted to a stream, you could do a lot of different types of functionalities. You could use, you could have asynchronous map and reduce, which is something that we don't have, for instance, using Lodash. Lodash offers us synchronous map and reduce, but with RxJS we could do a lot. So, but just because we want to cover the basics, that's the only use case that I have implemented for now, is just the iteration example. So here, this is exactly how you could iterate over a list. So every single time that this function is being called, exactly is the time that is a point that a data is being emitted to this string. So let's see what we have here. What I'm gonna do, so console log the post object, and I just want to create this. I already have this empty UL with class posts, and just I'm going to show the list of post inside my page, you know, as li elements added to that ul tag. Let's do this. So the other thing is, if any error happens here and once it's completed. So let's try this. Now to try this, we have to go back to app.js and uncomment this piece of code. Once I reload the page, here we go. We can see this post number 1, post number 2, and post number 3 is here. And interestingly enough, we also have this completed now. As you can see here, whenever we use from events, we don't have this completed, because the event is some kind of endless stream of data. But an array is not endless. It has an end. So if your array if the length of array is 3 at this case, it means that we are going to have 3 items transmitted to, you know, emitted to the stream of data that we have. So it's not that complicated. So far we have used events and we have used arrays. So as I said, you could use different types of array-like objects in JavaScript. Instead of arrays, you could also use sets. Let's do this. So all I have to do is just to uncomment these 2 lines and comment out this one line. So so using set is something similar to an array, and the only difference is that set provides us an set is some kind of implementation of an iterable pattern, which is something that we could cover later, but just for now to see how it works. So here, iterate sample. So do we have any errors? Ah, awesome. So as you see, it works again. We have all the 3 items here. The result is not any different. The next data type that we could use with my observable.from is maps. So map is a really interesting data type that I really like, because prior to maps, we didn't have any other solution to create a key value pair with this, the only way that we had to create key value pair was just the simple object that we have in JavaScript. JavaScript objects allows us to have a key value pairs, and the first part, using JavaScript object, the key should be always a string. So whatever you could pass, whatever string that you want to, you could pass here as a string, as the key of your key value map. But map offers us something that we cannot have using a simple object. Using maps, we can have anything, even objects instead of keys. So, but in this case, what I have done, I have created a map which is quite similar to, again, this array. So I have considered the array a map of numbers and objects. So if you take a look at this is how you could create a map with an initial data. This is the first item inside my map. So the interesting thing about maps, as I just said, is that instead of the key, which is the first argument of this array, you could pass whatever you want to pass. So even if you create an object, even if you pass a function, even if you pass a number, whatever you pass here, that JavaScript value is going to be the key of that key value pair, which is a really awesome feature. So, but again, as in this case, all I have done is just to simulate the array structure using map. We have 0 as the first key of the first object, we have 1 for the again for the second and 2 for the third. So here again you have commented out this one. The only change that I have to make here is that the data that is being emitted to my, you know, here my subscribe, is that it subscribes this pair, both of them. It sends both of them here. That's why I need to comment out this line as well if I want to use a map. So the 0, if I do this, the post here would be the key. But if I do 1, the post object would be the actual post object. So this should work the same as before now. Here we go. And it does work the same as an array. So this is, as you can see now, different types of data type that we can use to create observables from lists per se. We could have arrays, sets, and maps. Now I guess we have some, the basic understanding, but we still have this. Whenever we think about observables, it might seem a bit vague because we have created observables from events, we have created observables from arrays, but we haven't yet created any observable from scratch. So it's not a big deal. Let's do this. So this is the code that I have created to create an observable from scratch, but I'm not going to use this. What I'm going to do, I'm going to write it down first because it's a really important part of this process to learn. So the first thing is that we no longer want to listen to any event. So this is something that here, so let's just create something called, for instance, source, again with $, which means this is a stream, and Rx, so I'm gonna need this Rx, so which means I should import that Rx. So let's just do this from one of my other codes, paste it back here. Okay, great. So Rx observable. Now here, should I do from or anything? No, that's it. This is what I'm going to do. Rx observable, exactly, I'm going to push all of my code later, but this constructor that I have is what I'm going to use to create an observable from scratch. New observable. So what we should pass here is another function. So that function is going to receive an observable, an observer. So this part is quite similar to a promise. So when we create a promise, we do this. New promise. And we pass it a function. And that function, instead of an observer, receives two functions. One is resolve, the other is reject. Or it is sometimes called fulfill and reject. But I prefer resolve better. So anyway, so what we could do here, we could, for instance, have some kind of asynchronous operation, and inside that asynchronous operation, let's say you want to wait for 2 seconds, and then after that we could resolve a value, and that's it. This is the only point that you could resolve the value. Once that value is resolved, your promise is done. You cannot use that promise anymore. So instead of now this pattern, what you could do, you could pass a function to an observer and call next. This observer.next is exactly the same as calling resolve inside a promise. So whatever value that you pass here is going to be the value that is being emitted to the subscribe. So here, let's pass first value. And then let's subscribe to this. Source dot subscribe. Again, we have to create that function. And the first argument that we need to pass here is the value. So here the second function was meant to be for detecting errors, handling errors, and the last one for completion. Console.log completed in console.log error, and that's it. Now we could call console.log we have received a value, and we are going to print that value in the console. Okay, let's save this. Okay, great. So we have all this, and let's just try this code now. We have an observable which emits one single value. Let's see what happens now. Okay, let's comment out all the other examples so that we could have a cleaner. Yeah, here we go. We have received a value, first value, and as you can see, this completed is not being logged in the console, which means the observer is not, the stream of the data is not finished. So the other interesting thing about this observer, this pattern, is that similar again to a promise that you could call that resolve asynchronously, you could do the same here. Set timeouts. Now you could pass it a function. You could wait for, let's say, 1 second, and then call observer dot next. So the value that you pass here could be anything. Let's call second value. Let's see what happens now. First value is here, and after 1 second we have the second value. Let's just to make it a bit more so noticeable, let's say we have to wait 4 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Here we go. We have the second value emitted here. So is it done? No, because the observer is not completed. Because using RxJS Observables, we have to complete the observer. The difference here with promise is that when we have a promise, whenever we resolve, it means that that promise is completed actually. That promise is resolved and it's done. You cannot continue using that. So here, if you want to finish, you could do this. Observer.complete does what we needed. So try to run this. First value after 4 seconds. 4. Second value, and here we go. We have the completed in the console, which means now the observer is completed. Let's try this. Let's say after 4 seconds it happens. What if I call another set timeout? After 6 seconds I call another value. I call next and another value. This is something again similar to resolving a value for a promise after after that promise is already resolved. So if I do this, it happens 1, 2, 3, 4. It is completed, but after 6 seconds nothing happens because the observer is completed. That's why you cannot emit any other value to the chain anymore. So what you could do, you could just remove this line and put it here, and then it's going to work. After 4 seconds, you're going to have the second value, and after another 2 seconds, you're going to have another value, and voila, completed. That's it. So now we could remove this code and go back to my example. What I have inside this example is quite the same with some differences. Then here I have logged, I have more logs. For instance, after 1 second, I emit one thing, and after 2 another, and I have used error here as well. This is something that, for instance, if you send a request to the server and you wait, and if the request, throws in any error, what you could do, you could call observer.error inside, your after you receive the response of your XHR request. So if you do this, then you're going to have your console, your error function, console.log. Let's print this here, error and error. Let's see now what we have. Here we go. As you can see, we have 2 here, or let's just change this to something like this. Here we go. This is exactly where, if you want, you could add this debugger here to make sure that this function is being called. And now, as you can see, it's being called. So if I remove this one line, and interestingly enough, as you can see here inside this console, we have the first value and also the second value. But if you go through this list, after that second value, we have had set timeout, wait, 1 second, 2 seconds. None of the other asynchronous values are being emitted because we have, added this one line of code to here, which happens synchronously, which means which happens right away, and the observer is done. So interestingly, if you just take a look at this code, you could see that, okay, what about completion? If any error happens, does it mean that my observer is not being completed? But in some cases, I need my observer to be completed even if any error happens. You could do that using observers as well. Instead of calling subscribe right away, you could add a catch. So let's just do this. Let's first uncomment this and remove the debugger and see what we have in the console. When that error happens, we don't have the completed here. But if I add this one line of code and reload the page, as you can see, we have the completed, which means this .catch allows us to actually catch the error and also complete the observer. So again, it's something that you should decide based on whatever you need inside your application. That's it. So let's remove this error and see how all of these asynchronous values are being emitted. So, by the way, if you take a look, after 3 seconds, I complete the observer. But after 4 seconds, I have another next, which means this one should not be logged in the console. Let's see now what we are going to have here. First value, second value, and completed. Let's see. First, second, and an async value, another async value, and final async value. And after that, another async value after completion is not printed here. Exactly the same as what we needed it to be. So, okay, now we have a better understanding of the whole concept of an observer. observable. We used arrays, we used events to create observables, and we also created an observable from scratch. And we also learned the differences between an observable and a promise. So at this point, now we could start setting up our Redux middleware using observables. But since we don't have any time left, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna leave that for the next session. In the next session, assuming that we all know what it means to use an RxJS and use an RxJS to create our RxJS observable, we are gonna set up the Redux middleware, Redux observable middleware. So if you want to be prepared, you could find it here, Redux observable.js.org. This is the website. You could see how it works, and it's based on RxJS. You could use Redux Observable as a middleware along with your React application, your AngularJS application, and any other applications that you might have created before based on Redux. So that's it. We have to wrap it up for this session, and I hope you have enjoyed the topics that we have tried to cover in this session, and have a great day. Bye.